Superintendent Hutchins, School Superintendent of Mendocino County Office of Education.
Thank you, Jeff. I wanted to give John Schuster an opportunity to give some updates on where we are with our broadband implementation countywide. We have some big changes happening.
Yeah, so we're in the process of getting our E-rate actually deployed. So we're going from ASE to ADE network across the board. We're already off copper for all our sites. So our slowest is actually 30 meg. So over the next month, 2 months, we'll be implementing that change. And then we'll be taking a little more control over the network from CompuCom so we can make sure to protect our network from malware attacks, et cetera. So we can meet with our, what we would call insurance requirements to make sure we're doing proper login security, et cetera, to protect the network against ransomware and or just hacking in general across our system. Everything's going fine. It's like anything that, as someone mentioned about Starlink, chip shortage has affected everything. All our network equipment is still technically scheduled to arrive on time. Our switchover is actually at the end of February. So if for some reason we miss those deadlines, we have contingency plans with AT&T to make sure we carry over the coverage and then are covered with both the old ASE before we switch to ADE. So in general, everything's on track. No problem so far, but again, you get bumps along the way, but we have a great team and then we're trying to service everybody. And a big shout out to our friend Dave Wills, who has helped us with Big Grant to provide connections to areas that there's no way we could have got off copper and gone with microwave. So kudos to that team and any other of the groups that have helped us along the way and continue to do so.
So John, you have fiber to all of the school sites?
Do not have fiber to all the school sites. Several are served with microwave, but the slowest is 30 meg. As you know, like I mentioned, like Sherwood School, for example, there's some unique situations where we're leveraging off a local provider and bouncing. So that happens. Again, it kind of goes back to the concept of when you're AT&T and you get a bid, and even through a big grant, when they put out the offer, you're really hoping that someone's going to take that bid. But if you're AT&T and another provider, to get rid of that microwave and go to copper, for example, there's really very little incentive for them because of that return on the investment. So that's kind of an understanding that I want to gather more information and understanding and how the grants work. Because if you're AT&T or another provider and you're going to do last mile or middle mile, that infrastructure, dig out the infrastructure, that's super expensive, right? Millions of dollars. But their return on an investment, so my assumption is, without knowing yet, maybe Jeff or the rest can help, what is their incentive to do that? They must be getting additional grant money, et cetera, to offset that infrastructure upgrade, because they'll never get that return on investment because that population change in that remote area is probably not going to increase. So their long-term investment must be offset by some type of funding. Otherwise, why would they do it? So to answer your question, Jim, not all our sites are fiber yet. We want to get there. We're getting closer, but we're still not served that way yet.
But are you satisfied with the microwave?
Yeah, so a microwave is much better. Like Sherwood, it used to be copper and a couple different connections, et cetera. So I would say, yes, it's better than what we had before. There are some occasional problems, but so far the equipment has held up quite reliably.
Okay, thank you.
And I think the middle mile, the SB 156 funds, should help offset some of those build outs despite the population density. That is the intent, is to connect schools and anchor institutions throughout our county. So as the plans develop, if they aren't satisfactory, we should include details in comments. I'll be reaching out to you to get a better understanding of where resources are needed.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to pose that question because I want to make sure I become much more integrated, understand how the funding works, so we can understand what the difficulties are to make sure we can get that last mile done, especially for the underserved areas where, you know, when you get an AT&T trench team to go out, that's just not, there's really very little incentive for them to go out to this remote community that has 50 people, but they really need it, and they are underserved. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to call out Mendocino County Executive Office would be next on the list. I don't know that anyone is present, but Office of Emergency Service is on deck, and Brent Blazer has joined us, thankfully. But before he begins, I'm going to quickly scan to that list of routes that are in the middle mile, just to demonstrate that some of them are like the Leggett miles are probably intended to connect the school. Likewise, the route 222 in Talmadge is intended to bring fiber to the campus of the Mendocino County Office of Education in that area. So there are some of the solutions. And with that, I will prompt Brent Blazer to provide some comment. Thanks, everyone.
Hi, Jeff. Can you hear me okay?
We can. Thanks, Brent.
All right. Hey.
I'll give you more space.
No, I just couldn't see myself and wasn't sure if you guys could hear me. Great presentation. I really loved how you articulated where we fell in each of those classifications of the different definitions of rural county, because at first I was like, wait a minute, which one, some of those classifications we may not be represented. And once you started explaining it, it really got to the nuts and bolts of it. So nicely done. On the OES side, Office of Emergency Services, obviously this is a lot of private sector infrastructure build out, or we have county resources for response and such to microwave system, and unfortunately those really can't even touch what the communities would need. But what I would say is these systems are ever more important for our ability to reach out to the public and for people to get notifications, whether it's, especially with the fire threats that we have and different threats to our communities based on the environment and terrain and such. So one of the things I know we did that WIA test, and a lot of that is to see, we did that last year just to see what kind of range and touch and how functional some of these federal systems are in our county, and even how it interacts with, say, like Nixle and such, because these are all multiple layers of alerting capabilities. Nationally, the FCC reached out and invited us to participate in another WIA test. The results have not been published yet. The after action was still, they're looking to finish that in the new year now. They pushed it back. But an interesting finding, just looking at the preliminary data and such, was essentially like 75% of all the survey responses from that test were kicked out. And it was because we basically had to do live tests in order to be able to get any sort of response, right? Like, because when you did a test in the test protocols and the online portal, all it did was show you that it went out. It didn't really, you couldn't see what the actual impact was on your community and work with your partners and such. And so the only way you could get real on the ground, survey of your reach was doing tests like that. What they've done is they've created on devices, new mobile phones, stuff like that, a way for people to opt in to receive text messages. And what we did was we used a control group to be the people receiving messages, because it's really hard to explain to people how to turn that option on all the different devices that are out there and different platforms. Ultimately, what we found was a lot of the emergency managers were kind of like very skeptical of being able to advertise and exercise and not be perceived as failing, because most people won't figure out how to turn that on. So they'll just think they didn't get the message. And essentially that's what happened. Over 75% in a controlled group in which we gave direction and had positive control on volunteers and people who are more apt to listen. Basically all their survey responses were thrown out because they couldn't change the settings on their phone effectively. I'm just sharing that with the group because what ended up happening afterwards also was I got a slew of questions. You know, every time we have an event, I look at kind of the feedback that comes from the community, and I just kind of look and try to troubleshoot, you know, is this a real problem with the system? Is this an infrastructure issue within an area? Is this just technology changes? And what I'm seeing is most recently, I just had some people who contacted and said that they weren't getting nixles and they weren't, they would get them sporadically. And then that was really odd to me. I was like, wait a minute, you know, if you're getting them, you're registered, right? That's usually the first problem I have is not properly registered. Then, you know, working through it, I start to realize that a lot of people, and depending on their service and tech usage, they're turning off their service provider for their phone at home and using their infrastructure or whatever service provider they have. That quickly turns into they don't realize that they're on the internet, but they're no longer getting their cellular, you know, text messages for say nixles and things like that. And so I'm just trying to be cognizant and sharing with the group here that by, you know, in increasing our broadband, and as a lot of devices change and start becoming where they're Bluetooth cut, you know, basically linking like a web mesh technology, this you know, cellular providers are going to become more and more important, because even if they're off, once we get great infrastructure along the roads like we're doing, then you could use mesh technologies can be probably in making that more dense within interior and away from major arteries. So I just think it's really important, you know, to provide that access and to figure out ways to drive the prices down so that we can make it effective within our communities. Otherwise, this FirstNet, I think Jeff asked me to talk a little bit about the FirstNet or what my experience has been with it so far. I do have a FirstNet account. I've had it for years with work. What I know of it is I sit on another board. You know, really that was 150 cell towers that we were going to get within the state of California. If you break that down, you know, that's not a lot of positive, not a huge change within our ecosystem in the county. Service wise, I would say that Verizon, a lot of the different providers we hear about FirstNet, but other companies are having a first responder priority type system. I would say it's been a great experience. I've never really lost service. It's really hard to get. I've never gotten any, in even the Bay Area, the 12 counties working together have asked for specific data and throttling and how it's responded in different fires. I don't know that I've seen it come out. We've looked for it. I can say that I definitely don't. I have never really lost service, even in events, August, Oak. If there's coverage, I've had it with my phone. I will say that there's been a lot of criticism of the service. If you have AT&T and then FirstNet, like my rest of my family have a separate account, even though it's managed through both. And when I've had trouble and I have to go to billing, you know, it's really a struggle to get a hold of and delineate the two service provider. And that can be troubling for counties as well when you have a lot of phones in the county or local government that are some maybe FirstNet and some might not be. So service support could be has been a challenge a bit. Otherwise, I think, Jeff, is there anything else you wanted me to touch on? I don't know. I don't want to kind of take us a little bit away. I just wanted to also share, there's no platform to share. And I think these, the results of those types of tests that we've been doing and supporting with the feds and such, this is the backbone of it in a lot of ways. Like they're not separate. So I just want to thank you guys for all your hard work.
I have no additional questions, Brent. Thank you for the report. Maybe others do, so we'll open up for questions for Office of Emergency Service. Anyone have questions for Brent? Hearing none,